Why do some people consider suicide while others don't? Hello and welcome back to today's video. As you can tell by the title and the intro, we are going to talk about suicide. And this has been a question like, why do some people consider suicide while others don't, that I have been wondering for a while now. Hearing more and more stories about suicidal people, I just noticed that there were so many different stories. There were like from breakups to financial issue to abusive past and childhoods and stuff like that. And one thing that I noticed was like how different the stories were, and without wanting to be judgmental or saying one is worse than the other. So if you looked at it from the outside, it looked like some of the stories weren't that bad. And others were like, okay, I understand that that person became suicidal. So after observing myself on kind of categorizing it and being like, okay, I get this part, but I don't get this part, this question came up like, why do some people consider suicide while others don't? And there are some people who had like incredibly harsh childhoods and never considered suicide, and other ones who had like an easy or a good childhood, quote unquote, and did consider suicide. So it was really, really interesting. So last year, I actually met someone who was suicidal at some point of his life. So eventually, like a half year later, I reached out to him and I was like, listen, I want to do an interview or like a video about this topic, and I would just love to chat with you about this and just ask you a few questions and your experience, and if like any insight that you had from that experience. And he was totally into it. He was like, I would love to do something like this because it's a topic that is very dear to my heart due to the reason that he has experienced it himself. He's like very passionate about helping other people and educating people, regardless if it's the suicidal person itself or even people in general who never got in touch with it to begin with, like myself. And his name is John. He's like an incredible person. He's very caring, he's very fun, and just lovely to be around. So John is, as I said, someone who had a suicidal experience in the past, and we identified with the suicide aspect and was able to overcome it. In this video, we are going to talk about the lessons that he has learned, insights, helpful tips, also on how to handle it if you are suicidal yourself or if you know someone who is suicidal. Also, I really want to make a disclaimer on this one. It's like for educational purpose, it's for information purpose. Like obviously, if you need help, go seek that help. With that, I would also like to do a shout out to John because he is open to help people if they need help. So I'm going to put his contact information in the description box below. So if you need anything, you can reach out to him. He's an amazing guy, really, really lovely to work with. With that, we are going to go into the actual video on the conversation that I had with John, the question that I asked him, the answers that he gave me. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. The first question that I asked him was, why do some people consider suicide while others don't? And the answer that he gave me was like, there isn't like one specific reason on why people consider suicide. It's usually an accumulation of different things. So it can be like an intense experience, but it can also be like the mundane stuff, the everyday stuff, like having bad sleep habits, having bad one-on-one relationship, like with friends and family who are constantly tearing you down, a general bad mindset or self-talk in general, but even something like a bad diet. It's like an accumulation of all those things that can actually bring a person to being suicidal. And this is something that I found really interesting because it highlights the point that suicide is not something that happens in a moment. It can, but it doesn't have to be. And it's something that can like slowly build up without the person even noticing it. Another interesting thing that he told me was like, in general, from his experience, it's usually men that are suicidal and not so much women. He only met 3 women that were suicidal, and those women usually were very masculine in their approach and in their energy. So this is another thing that I found so interesting about men being in general in tendency more prone to suicide than women. Another really interesting reason on why specifically men tend to become suicidal is the breakup of a relationship. And I remember he told me that, and I was like, wait, what? Breaking up with his woman or the breakup of a relationship can be like the tipping point for becoming suicidal? And the answer from him was yes, it's actually quite common, and it appears that the failure in a relationship, in the intimate relationship, has a huge impact on the self-esteem of a man. Another really interesting reason that he gave me, and that he had also experienced himself, was the good childhood experience. What I talked about with him was the fact that some people who had a really harsh childhood grow up and never consider suicide, and there are other people who had the good childhood and do consider suicide. And the reason I do it quote unquote is because I have personally found that the good childhood is so objective. Like someone from the outside is like, oh, they had such a good childhood, but objectively speaking, what you see from the outside never compares to what that person or that child is experiencing inside. So whether someone had a good or a bad childhood actually really comes down to how that child experienced it, and not what objectively speaking happened. He said that those with a good childhood do experience suicide because even though they grew up with good self-esteem and good self-worth, and they're like, I believe in myself and I trust in myself, but they're missing the practice. So even though they grew up with all those beautiful emotions and how they think about themselves, about others, and about life, they never had to test their faith. So one of the differences between the good and the bad childhood or bad childhood child is that one of them had to build the strength of resistance, of pushing through and not giving up, while the other one, even though the one of the bad childhood might have a negative self-talk, but they have a lot of resilience at the same time. While the one with the good childhood is like, oh, I have an amazing self-talk and I feel amazing about myself, but they don't really have resilience. So once they get put to the test, they kind of fail and can get to the point of suicide. Another way to look at it is, even though you develop the sense of self-worth and positivity, you do not develop the skill of it. So when you get put to the test, it crumbles because you haven't built the muscle. That does not mean that those with a bad childhood can or won't become suicidal, but I just really want to highlight on, it doesn't matter what kind of childhood you had. There are so many different ways on why you can become suicidal, and this is also something that John kept telling me over and over again. It's not that one specific thing, it can be so many different things. Bottom line of this first question was, nobody wants to be suicidal. It's just that at some point they come to the point where it's like life is not worth living anymore, and it's like an accumulation of confirmations that it's not worth living, it's not worth the hustle. And it's about overcoming that aspect. The next question that I asked John is how to help someone who is suicidal. One of the most interesting things that he told me after asking that question was, most people, the majority of those people, are not even consciously aware that they are suicidal. And this was so fascinating to me. It was like, how can you not know that? And it actually was the same for him as well. As I said prior, it's like a gradually increasing thing that it just all of a sudden you find yourself in it, but it doesn't happen in a moment, it's an accumulation. So it just starts with bad habits, and all of a sudden your mindset and your thought patterns become worse and worse. And this is actually something that happened with John as well. It wasn't like that he woke up one day and he was like, oh, you know what, I'm gonna kill myself. It was more like that all of a sudden he catched himself thinking certain thoughts that he was like, that's kind of crazy. Like, oh, what would happen if I just threw myself in front of a bus? Or what would happen if I just ended my life? And basically, he just catched himself having those weird questions or those weird ideas. And he was like, this is kind of scary. This is not normal anymore. And I want to put in a personal disclaimer on this one. if you just wonder about what would happen if your life was over, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are suicidal. Thinking about death, I think to a certain degree is normal. So if you ever catch yourself thinking about those things, do question them. Like, why am I thinking about this? Is it just curiosity, or is it an aspect of myself that I'm just starting to gravitate towards? And do I need to be aware of how I'm living my life and how my self-talk is on those general patterns that we talked about, like diet, sleep, my finances, relationship, and all that stuff? Like, in general, do I find my life worth living or not? If yes, it's like, okay, this is most likely going to be just an interesting question to think about, like what would happen? But if you're like, I don't really like living my life, I would consider that a moment to pause and be like, okay, where am I going at the moment? Like, what is happening? Another really interesting point that John made about this was the danger of pointing people towards being suicidal, of kind of giving them identity and be like, oh my God, you're thinking about this, or you're doing this, you must be suicidal. So it's very important to be aware of this and not try to use this identity of being suicidal and put it on someone else, because making this your identity is the absolute last thing that you would want for yourself, but even that other person that you either know or suspect on being suicidal. Now, going back to the original question, like how to help someone who is suicidal, there were many different tips that he was able to give. Like the one was that we mentioned at the very beginning, like improve your day-to-day circumstances, like your sleep pattern, your diet, your exercising habit, your relationship, like the people that you are in contact with. And just improving your everyday life will help you getting out of the slump if you already are in it, or prevent you from going farther down that road. Another one is pattern interrupt. So either if you are the person that are struggling with suicide or catching yourself having those weird thoughts, I'm going to do something different, and it can take an effort to pull yourself up and go for a walk, look at a funny video, whatever it takes to get you out and interrupt that thought pattern. The same goes if you are not a suicidal one, but you are in touch or in a conversation with someone and they're kind of having this conversation with you. It's interrupting their patterns, not being like, oh my God, you're such a poor person, but interrupting their pattern, be like, you know what, why don't we just go for a walk? Basically, it's about not entertaining the suicide aspect, thought, speech, whatever that person or yourself is having. Another really, really interesting thing that he said was understanding that it's not an identity. So for yourself or another person, it's about understanding that you are not suicidal, or that person is not suicidal, because if you heard it or not, whatever you put the words I am or you are becomes your identity, becomes who you are. So one really interesting thing that John had to share is about understanding that it's not something that you are, it's something that is happening to you. So you are not suicidal, but suicide is happening to you because of all those other factors. And being able to take the suicide and detach it from your identity, from who you really are, is not only extremely liberating, but it gives you something to work with, because as long as you believe this is who you are, you feel like there's nothing you can do about it. But if you're like, okay, this is something that is happening to me, it's easier to push it away and be like, no, it's not who I am, therefore I don't have to act on it. But if you believe that this is who you are, you feel like you don't have any other choice than actually act on it. At the end of the day, it remains a delicate topic. Do seek help if you need it. Do reach out to John if you need it, or even other professionals. The next thing that we started to talk about was, what about people who talk about being suicidal? And actually, John did confirm the cliche, like the one who talk about it are most unlikely to follow through on it. It really are the quiet ones to look out for, the ones who are not talking about it. They are more likely to be suicidal than the ones who are actively talking about it and consider doing it and telling the whole world that they want to do it. Now, I want to put another disclaimer. I don't want to diminish those people, but they are actually after something else. In general, in the majority part, not all of them. So in general, it really are the quiet people who are more likely to commit the suicide than the one just talking about it. And what John also had to share about this, it's really that they're actually after something else. So it's putting themselves into a victim state, and getting into that victim mentality will help them gain something. It will either help them gain sympathy, love and connection, significance. So it will fulfill an emotional need for them, and this is why they use suicide. One interesting way to distinguish that is that if the talk about suicide doesn't help them get what they want, they will switch to another topic. So I found that really interesting as well, just observing these patterns and be like, okay, what if I just ignore that suicidal talk? What will happen? And some of them will just use another method. They will maybe use anger or frustration or sadness or just something else to get their emotional need met instead of using suicide. I want to emphasize the difference between not entertaining something and just plainly ignore it. So you never know how a person is going to react, so ignoring them can actually lead to them actually doing the act, even though they are not suicidal in the first place. So again, there's like so many different nuances in this whole concept, and I just want to emphasize the individuality, and I don't want you to take this as a one-fits-all approach. It's really about broadening your horizon and how individual it is with every single person. The next question that I asked John, like, how can you know that that person will never go back to suicide? Be it a child, a loved one, a partner, a friend, a family member. Because it's not just the person itself that impacts, it's also the people around them. Like, what about the people around them? How can they feel safe again and certain that that person will not go back to that? And John had, again, some really, really interesting things to say about that as well. One of the things he said is it's their problem and not the suicidal person's problem. So if you lost faith in that person, it's not about that person reinstalling the faith in you. It's about you refining that faith in that person, and that does actually mean working on yourself. And one of the way you can do this is, on one side, observing the improvement that that person is making, like the change in lifestyle, for example, and reinforcing that and be like, oh my god, this is amazing that you are doing this, I so highly support this, and just being positive about their improvement. Another thing, especially when it comes to men, it's about pushing them. It's about helping them create that sense of achievement, of worthiness, of like, I can overcome anything, and not sugarcoat them. This is like one of the worst things that you can do, but actually push them and be like, I know you can do it, it's hard, but I believe in you, and kind of be their biggest cheerleader in their success, in their achievement, and not be like, oh, he was suicidal, we gotta like sugarcoat him and prevent any difficult things or harsh things happening for them. This is actually the worst thing that you can do them, because it's gonna like put them in a downward spiral again. The other thing is also about working on yourself and lead by example. So improve your own sleep schedule, your own diet, your own exercise habit, and be an inspiration for other or for that person to follow along as well. And be like, oh, okay, I wasn't suicidal, but those are the factors that get you to being suicidal. You know what? We're gonna work on them together. Like, it's gonna benefit me as well if I implement a regular exercise routine or a good diet, and just gonna do it together. You just for improving your own life, and having your friend, family, loved one to, you know, have someone on their side who is improving with them. Then the last one is the trust and faith aspect. There is a component of you can't control it, you just have to have faith. You just have to be positive and believe in them, and there is no guarantees. Like the things I just mentioned, they're the best thing that you can do, but you don't have control or guarantee over another person. So it's just about surrendering and trusting that it's going to be fine. Just doing that, they are doing the best they can and you are doing the best that you can. Another thing that can also be really helpful is just having an open conversation and be like, you know, you really scared me with what you did. And also, really important, don't blame that person. It's not about making them feel bad. It's just about being open and vulnerable and be like, I was so scared. I don't really know how to handle it. I want to move forward with this, or I want to support you with this. I don't really know how to. And helping that person understand it's about your fears and you're trying to overcome them as well, but not making them feel bad. It's just about, this is where I'm at and I want to move forward and I want to move forward with you. I want to help you. And I also got to work on myself, and just having these open conversations that I believe and have experienced can help both parties. The suicidal person can also kind of be freed from guilt, be like, okay, this is what happened, it is what it is, let's move forward. Instead of them feeling responsible maybe of him to make you feel good as well. So it's about both people taking responsibility for their own actions and moving forward and helping each other in moving forward. So it goes the other way around as well. If you are the suicidal person, be like, you know, I actually feel guilty for what I did and that you will never have faith in me again. I really wanna reinstall that faith. I'm still scared. I still have those kind of thoughts. This is what I'm working on. This is what would really help me. So instead of constantly asking me, are you okay? This question would really help me. Hey, did you do your exercising today? Even though you didn't feel like it. Like just telling the other person what you actually need to move forward. This brings us to the end of the video. And again, I really want to emphasize this is just a general video on broadening your horizon on the topic of suicide. I will put the link and contact information of John in the description box below. So feel free to reach out, talk to him, tell him what you need, or, you know, if you just have questions in general, he would love to help. So feel free to do that. Other than that, if you liked the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. And I see you in the next one.